Welcome to The Unconventional Path, Secrets to Igniting Your Business with Bela and Mike. Hi, I'm Bela Musitz, a former 3-time entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and now the David D. Ray Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Clarkson University in Potsdam, New York.
And I'm Mike Wasserman, Professor of International Management at the Münster University of Applied Sciences in Münster, Germany. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy our podcast. The two of us want to take the lessons we've learned over the past 3 decades as entrepreneurs, investors, managers, and professors, and leverage our network of interesting friends, former students, business partners, and others we've met along the way in our life's journey to bring you interesting stories, ideas, and insights into innovation, entrepreneurship, and the people that take unconventional paths to find happiness at work and in life.
Before we get to today's guest, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Clarkson University
and the Münster University of Applied Sciences. Before we start, just a quick note. Bela recorded the following interview live in front of an actual audience, so sorry for a little extra background noise. So we'll jump into it. Today's interview is with Tyler Wrightson, founder of Leet Cybersecurity, Stacks Espresso Bar, and also a new co-working space that he'll talk about in a few seconds.
So let me welcome Tyler Wrightson. Tyler, please come join us. So we're going to have a conversation about Tyler, and let me do a little bit of an introduction, if you'll allow me. So Tyler has founded 3 companies?
I mean, I've closed more, if that's what you want to know.
So right now you have Leet Cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
You have Stacks Expresso Bar.
Yep.
And you have some co-working space.
Yep, just opened up a co-working space, CoLab.
And you've also written 2 books.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That you can find on Amazon, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So, really accomplished person. And I thought one of the interesting things about Tyler is his books and some of his companies are all about cybersecurity. So really nerdy stuff.
It's true.
And then he starts a coffee restaurant, coffee bar, what is it called?
Coffee shop.
Coffee shop,
yeah.
Right? So really different. And I thought that would be kind of an interesting conversation to sort of understand the differences and the challenges in those 2 very different types of businesses. But first of all, let's go back to the early years. So where did you grow up?
Kinderhook, New York.
Okay.
Yep.
And entrepreneurs in the family?
Sort of. So my parents, I hate microphones. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, cool. So my parents started a natural foods company when they first got married. That didn't really last very long, supposedly. So they have 5 kids. Supposedly we're all eating all of the goods there. So my grandfather had a relatively successful steeplejack business. So he did like high construction. I think that's probably the only folks in the family.
Okay, and you said you had 4 siblings?
Yeah.
And entrepreneurship in any of those?
Lately, yeah. So my sister opened up a juice bar about a year ago, acquired a juice bar. My youngest brother started a rim repair business. Yeah.
So clearly there was something in that organic food that
Might be. Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of drove you to the... And are you the oldest, youngest?
I'm the oldest man in the family. Yep.
Okay.
So I only have one older sister.
Yeah. And where'd you go to school?
So I went to Ichabod Crane. Yep.
Wow.
Riders represent.
Yeah.
Yep. Technically, I did drop out of Ichabod Crane in my senior year. Yep. Which was very, very good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. So we won't talk about higher education then and stuff that I do.
If you want. That's fine with me.
Well, but the point here is that, there's often a debate about is higher education necessary? Does it prepare you? And there's clearly examples of individuals where you have the entrepreneurship gene, and it was turned on when you were born.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, you clearly do, right? And so I think that's wonderful. So what inspired you to start your own business? Let's say what was your first business?
So my first business was almost immediately after I dropped out of high school. I started a company called Initech Computer Services. Anyone catch the reference? Yes, who said it? Nice job. Yeah, Office Space. It's a hilarious, cult classic. It was like this big evil corporation, so I thought it was pretty ironic. Yeah, I was just doing like basic computer repair stuff, and you know, very, very limited success, but it was enjoyable, you know.
So could we say that when you were in high school, you were sort of on the nerdy side?
No, actually, I wasn't on the nerdy side.
So you started this computer repair business, but
I mean, I don't know. I'm not good with labels.
uh-huh.
I was, huh?
That's me.
Mean?
Yeah.
No, it's no.
Be a nerd in high school?
No, I think nerd is a compliment. I just don't think I was. I would have associated myself with nerddom in high school. I totally get it now. I totally get that people could probably easily label me a nerd, but no, I was just like a normal kid. You know, I skateboarded a lot, rollerbladed, BMX, snowboarded.
Yeah.
You know, and computers was just another
Another thing that
hobbies.
you did.
Yeah.
But you must have done it really well.
Not back then.
Well, knowing what you know
In
now,
retrospect,
not back
yeah,
then.
exactly. Yeah.
So the first business what did you do again?
It was just basic computer repair type stuff, you know, like setting up home networks and that kind of stuff.
One-person business?
Yeah, it was
Employees?
Just me. Yeah, it was me and a cell phone. That was it.
Okay.
Yep.
And then what came after that one?
So what did I do after that? I think technically after that, I tried creating some sort of like website that some people had approached me about. It was called Rent a Server, and it was not what you think. It was like social networking for restaurant servers, that kind of thing. And that collapsed pretty quickly. Then I was at GE in network operations here in Schenectady, and hating every minute of it. And so I started Lark Computers and started a storefront doing similar stuff, like basic computer repair type stuff. And this was, I think 2010. And so I was at GE feeling pretty miserable. I was trying to like get the business started while I was there. And one day I just had an epiphany, like, why am I at this job that I absolutely despise? So without really much of a plan, I was like, all right, I'm done with this, and left and devoted myself to Lark. And simultaneously, so I can't remember which technically started first. I started Leet Cybersecurity back then, but I think in my mind it was a lot harder to start a cybersecurity company back then. You know, in my mind when I was growing up, and actually maybe it makes a little more sense to take a small step back and explain like specifically what I do within computers. So all Leet Cybersecurity does is hack organizations. We identify weaknesses that hackers would exploit. We don't fix anything. We don't sell hardware, software. That's it. And so that's been my passion since I was a little kid, is breaking security. And so growing up, I thought it was like an absolute dream job. I was like, oh my God, there must be like 5 people in the world that get paid to do this. And so when I started Leet Cybersecurity, I started Lark Computers. I'm like, okay, Lark Computers is going to be an easier thing to generate some revenue, and it'll give me some time to build Leet Cybersecurity. And ironically, Leet took right off, and Lark was okay. It like basically was cash flow positive, but you know, not really putting much money in my pocket. So yeah, that was the real starting point for Leet Cybersecurity. Was technically about 8 years ago.
And so talk about that journey a little bit. How did that grow?
So back then, a lot of my work came from other technology-related companies that were subbing stuff out to Leet Cybersecurity, and I would take anything on at that point. You know, anything cybersecurity-related, I would do it. And I got a call from my oldest hacking friend who lives in Boston. He's like, hey, I joined this huge company. Like, we have this open position. He's like, you know, would you ever want to join us? I said, absolutely not, but I'll have a conversation with your manager because, you know, maybe you guys will sub stuff out to me. And so they painted this really great picture. They're doing some really interesting work, you know, work with like top 5 banks and things like that. Stuff that Leet Cybersecurity never would have been able to gain access to, you know, with our current trajectory. And so I decided, all right, maybe it does make sense to join them for a little while. So I closed Leet Cybersecurity, joined them for a year and a half, and hated it.
So you joined them as an employee?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Hated it. I just don't thrive in that type of position. Even though it was a really great job, it was really great work, I was dealing with really cool people, it just wasn't for me. So then, about a year and a half into that, made the decision, my wife and I, we moved down to Miami for a little bit. We're going to move back home. We're going to restart Leet Cybersecurity and focus on that. And I got a call from two of my friends, the folks that founded Great Castle Security over in Troy, and had some conversation with them. I was like, hey, I'm restarting Leet Cybersecurity. Realized that that's what I'm meant to do. And they're like, yeah, well, why don't you join us instead? As you can be our first technical employee. We'll give you a part of the company. We'll acquire Leet and all that. And that also seemed like a really great opportunity. So I did that. I joined them for about a year and a half, and realized that also was not for me. That I really and truly just meant to be in control of what I'm building. So we parted ways amicably. Still work with them for a little while afterwards, but restarted Leet with my wife, and been gung ho on that for the past 5 years. Actually, I think we're about a month away from our 5-year anniversary.
Yeah. So how big are you guys now?
So now we're 12 people. We're trying to grow. We're trying to bring on some more technical folks and trying to expand into additional markets too. In the past, the first couple of years, we did no work in New York State. It was all across the country, and then we just got a ton of state work and other local companies. So we've been doing a lot of work here. So we really want to specifically try to target other companies or other geographies like Boston or New York or DC. So.
And what's your typical engagement like?
From what perspective? Like who we deal with?
Yeah, for customer,
Yeah.
how big, how long?
So we don't do anything with small businesses. We only deal with medium enterprise clients. We do a lot of work with New York State. We do a lot of work with healthcare, like hospitals and things like that. Average engagement length is about 2 to 3 months. Yeah.
And you're still doing the same thing. You're sort of trying to show the weaknesses in their IT systems
That's
and
all
and
we
their
do.
security.
All we do
You
is-
don't fix it. You just sort of
Nope.
discover the weaknesses.
So in some ways, in some of these cases, we have the capacity to fix it, but we're trying to avoid any conflict of interest. We don't want to say, hey, you need to install some more widgets, and by the way, we sell widgets. So it's we're trying to be very, very focused, and especially from a business perspective, the more we can focus, I think the better we'll be. So, I like to tell people that we're hyper laser focused, that, all we do is break security, and we're providing extra value that way.
Yeah.
Because that's all we do.
And what is your typical employee? Their background, what do they look like? Or
They run the gamut. I get asked that question a lot. So we've got somebody who's majoring in want to be a physicist. We've got a business major. We've got comp sci kids. The challenging part is that there is not good curriculum right now to do what we do. So a lot of it just comes down to whether or not that person has a passion for what we do, which is one of the requirements. Which is very, very unique and special to our industry. I like to compare it to even accounting, right? So once you have the basics of accounting, you're pretty good for the rest of your life. You'll pick up new things as you go along, but it doesn't change nearly as rapidly as cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has active threats, right? People all across the world who are looking for vulnerabilities in the software that we use every single day. And so you need the desire to learn that stuff every single day to stay up to speed. Otherwise, a month goes by and you're behind the 8 ball. Do you have a question?
I think you just answered it. I was going to say, is there a business meeting that you have, or are they responsible for the research to keep up with all that by themselves?
It's both. So we try to do things to foster it internally, but at the end of the day, it's personal responsibility. And again, ultimately to me, it comes down to passion. If you don't have a passion for it, it's going to be very, very hard to fake it. Yeah. So it's you just need to want to learn this stuff every single day. Okay. So, yeah.
And do you find it? I'm sorry. Was there another question?
Yeah, there's a question, Mary.
Yeah, go.
I'm really interested in how you guys do process modeling for taking the information from assisting clients with previous threats. Well, now how do you add it back into your value stream and either spread it to the investment for the employees, structural knowledge for certain kinds of systems, which could help your information infrastructure? I'm just curious.
So you're saying, how do we take the work clients have already done? Oh yeah. So actually, that's one of the biggest things we do is that one of our competitive differentiators is we've been developing a software platform in-house since we started 5 years ago, and it is specifically on that. It's a business process management tool for hacking organizations.
Can I just do a quick rejoinder? So that really means that you guys are not only assess threats for clients, but you're also closet cybersecurity developers.
Yeah, to a degree, I would think so. Yeah.
And is it a challenge to find employees?
To a degree. So right now, within cybersecurity is a phenomenal field to get into. There is something like over 500,000 open job positions and 0 unemployment. And so clearly that puts a challenge on folks like me looking for talent. I think one of, again, our competitive differentiators is that because we're so hyper laser focused on hacking, and that is an area of extreme passion for a lot of people, that I can tell them, hey, come work for me and you'll get to do what you love every single day. Where, you know, if you go work for a larger company, you know, you might be reviewing like documents and, you know, policies and procedures and things that are very important from a cybersecurity perspective, but far more boring.
So are your employees, you have any remote employees, or are they all geographically here?
So we have a very, very flexible work policy. I believe a lot in life balance versus work-life balance because everyone needs to work to live. So, you know, you need to balance your life. So ultimately, I don't care where they work from or when they work, as long as they get their work done. So we're trying to grow it so that we can scale and, you know, have people in, I don't know, remote countries even. So we've got folks over in California, Boston, Canada, who do work for us. And my guys, I don't care, you know, where they're at when they're doing their stuff, or my ladies. So.
And so in the last 5 years since you've sort of restarted this business, what has been the biggest challenge?
I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know. There's so many. I think one of the largest challenges with my industry, well, with this model is right now we're extremely spiky from a revenue perspective. So we'll go from, you know, cloud 9, like we're swimming in cash, to, oh my God, like what are we gonna do? Like we need money to come in, and we've got clients telling us, oh yeah, we'll, you know, we need a couple more days, we'll send it out to you. So it's like, that to me is one of the key differences between Stacks and Leet. And it's a challenge because, you know, again, I'm not independently wealthy. You know what I mean? I can't, and no one in my family is, so I can't really go to them and be like, you know, we just need to a little bit to get by. It's like, it's a real challenge.
Yes, yes. Part of the challenge in many sort of billable hours businesses, which this sort of is.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
And you have relatively short engagements,
Yeah.
is you got to keep them stacked.
Exactly. So we're trying to combat that we've started this new service, which we call Hacker Guards, in which we do what we do on a regular basis, which ultimately really is what organizations need. Because the problem is that hackers don't just like check your organization 1 week a year and then say, oh no, they're secure. I'll be back the same week next year. It's like they're continuously probing organizations and looking for specific weaknesses. And so we're developing this model where on a weekly and monthly basis, we're probing that organization, looking for those same weaknesses so they can fix them on a faster basis.
So that gives you kind of a recurring revenue model.
Exactly. And that software is being built to help us deliver that in a very, very efficient, economical way.
Have you raised any outside capital?
No. Nope. Started both without even much like in savings. So when I left Gray Castle, I had a small amount of savings. I think I had like $5,000, and I had a couple checks coming in I might have had like 20 or 25, and that was quickly spent acquiring Stacks. So I was right back to basically zero pretty quickly.
Right. So from the time that you started your cybersecurity business, you left Gray Castle, to the time you had your first customer, what was that window? How long was that window?
Oh, I think it was days.
Days.
Yeah. Because, I don't know, for lack of a better way, I think I've got a lot of connections within cybersecurity. That's all I've been doing for my entire life, professionally. And so, you know, it's just a matter of like picking up the phone and saying, hey, you know, I'm doing this now. And that's where I think a lot of people who have made similar jumps experience that type of serendipity. And it's like, you know, the more you think about it, it's like, it's not necessarily like serendipitous. It's just like simple logic. It's like when you free yourself up to tell people this is all I'm doing, they want to work with you, and they're like, oh, okay, well, I've got that type of work. Let me give you that type of work. So it's like, you know.
Excellent. So let's switch now to Stacks.
Sure.
The Espresso bar, right? So how do you go from nerdy cybersecurity, and I mean nerdy as a compliment,
I take
right?
it as a compliment.
Yeah, that's how I mean it. Back when I went to school, it wasn't a compliment. And moving into an espresso coffee bar.
Yeah. So I was working from home. Let me think what. So I started Leet in November of 2014. And I was finishing up my second book at that time, which is technically one of the reasons why I was like, I need to make this jump. I need to finish this expletive book. Because it's a lot of work to write a book. And so I was working from home, and I need to escape. I can't work from one little closed-in area for any period of time. And so I would go to this coffee shop, Cafe Vero on Lark Street, probably 3 to 4 hours every single day. And they had a great product. They had terrible staff. I still don't even really know that much about coffee, to be honest. I just knew that it tasted good and I liked it. And I overheard sometime in March of 2015 that they were closing, that the owner didn't want to renew the lease for whatever reason. So I asked the barista behind the counter, I was like, oh, can you find out if he's trying to sell it? And, it seems interesting. Because I could see some obvious problems with it. Like they're running out of like cups and lids and chocolate and stuff. I'm like, come on, guys, like pretty important to your business. And so I was like, if it was a reasonable cost, I could probably fix those problems. And so long story short, I met with the owner. The reason why he was selling seemed like a logical reason. He had a business partner. His business partner was managing that location and decided he wanted to go pursue a golf career. And so, he had a full-time job. He couldn't watch over this, and that's why all these things were failing. So I have virtually no experience other than when I was a teenager working in like a hardware store and that kind of stuff with retail. Definitely no experience with food service or coffee. But it seemed like a interesting opportunity. It seemed like the things that needed to be fixed were obvious. And the number one reason why I pulled the trigger on it was because I had no experience with it. And all I kept thinking was, even if this money goes up in flames, like imagine what I'll know at the end of this journey. So even if a year from now I have to close it, it's like, all the scrambling to try to fix it, I'll probably learn a lot of stuff. So I want to give some insight into like the structure so that you can see the evolution of some of the deals that I've structured. Because since that time I've acquired 2 other shops and opened one more myself, and we're opening up another. So he put a value of $30,000 on the hardware, and he just wanted to sell the hardware and walk away and be done with it. We'll take over the lease. So basically, what it came down to was, I'll write a check for $20,000, and he'll hold a note for the remaining 10. And I used his own equipment as collateral for that. So I said, if I miss a single payment, come rip your equipment out, and you're still up $20,000. That was an extreme amount of money to me back then. The most amount of money I've ever spent on anything, especially something that I had no real experience with. So I did not want it to fail. But that structure of essentially collateralizing what they're selling to me has come in handy, and I'll tell you about some of the other deals that have proven to be pretty good since then.
Yeah, sometimes I've heard that called a clawback, where if you miss
That
a
sounds
payment,
very
they
appropriate.
can claw it back.
That sounds very appropriate.
Right? And then
Yeah.
you're out of business.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're extremely motivated.
Exactly.
Right? It's not like, the bank's going to call a note and
Yeah.
they'll stretch it out for 6 months.
Yeah.
This is like the guy shows up in a truck, takes out your coffee brewing equipment,
Exactly.
and you're out of business.
That was exactly the deal that we
So
struck.
that's a lot of motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that business is obviously growing because you just
Yeah.
talked about acquiring some additional ones.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges? I like to sort of compare, right,
Yeah.
the sort of tech business to the coffee business.
Yeah.
What sort of things are similar
Yeah.
in running and managing and growing a business like that?
I think one of the biggest similarities is that I love them both. They're both super interesting because they're so different, but they're still interesting business challenges. I think that's one of the advantages we've had in both of my businesses is that exposure to both of these and exposure to both these teams and both of these problems gives each business unique perspective to say, oh, well, we fixed this way and the other one. And I also think that, so my primary background was within cybersecurity consulting. So I was only that one time at GE, like an in-house person. So I think bringing that type of perspective, like a consultant's perspective to coffee and how we should run it and grow it and scale it, and treating it like a business from day one has allowed us to grow. And we've implemented, I think, some relatively cutting edge technology for coffee shops. I don't think a lot of coffee shops really embrace technology like we have, which, so I don't know if you call that a similarity per se.
So what's an example?
Just simple things like homegrown inventory tracking, ways to report problems, ways to process ordering utilizing like things like Trello and Google Docs and things like that. Like if you talk to a non-technical coffee shop owner, they're probably like, you know what I mean? But you've been utilizing that stuff since day one.
So it sort of gives you a better insight into what's going on.
Yeah, that's been
managing
huge.
your expenses
Yep.
and your revenues, and at the same time, putting in some system processes to make sure those things don't go out of control.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm big on processes kind of being, I don't know, a core part, if not the savior of businesses. You know, I don't want to have to be operational, and frankly, I'm not technically operational in the business, and so the way we ensure that things get done the way that we want them to get done is through processes. And so again, we've got technology to back up those processes. So, you know, a lot of good insight into that, and a lot of data generated from that. Like obviously, being somewhat nerdy, the data to me is pretty important. And so we've got some interesting things there too.
And what about hiring employees,
Yeah.
right? So a fair number of these employees are facing the customer on
Exactly.
a daily basis. Right?
Exactly.
So talk about that process and what you look for.
Yeah, so that's actually another area where we see a lot of similarities that I don't think most traditional coffee shops would put a lot of effort into it. From day one, so the conversation I had, and also I probably should have talked more about Ron, who is my coffee hacker, who knows, he is my equivalent in coffee. You know what I mean? I recognize like another passionate nerd. I'm like, he loves coffee as much as I love cybersecurity. So I'm like, I got to work with this guy. And so the very first conversation we had was about the importance of the customer experience, and that coffee is second to that. That ultimately, one of the examples I like to use is if you have a bad customer experience and you treat the customers poorly and you give them the best cup of coffee, they're still going to hate you. But if you give them a lackluster coffee, and frankly, if you spill that coffee on them, but they really like you and like the experience you give them every time, they're going to say, oh, don't worry about it, and they're going to come back. And thus, we place a huge level of importance on the people we hire to make sure that they can have that positive interaction every time. And so I think that's one of the areas, too, where most retail, especially food service businesses, I think, don't place a high importance on personnel, especially like baristas and that type. And we place an extreme level of importance there. When we first started, up until maybe 2 years ago, so for the first 3 years, every new hire was interviewed by everybody else on the team. So everyone else got to meet them ahead of time before they work with them. And frankly, anyone could potentially veto that person and say, I just don't get a good vibe from them. I don't think they would fit in. We're like, okay, great. Let's look for the next person. And so again, I think that's something that's easier to do in a professional services consulting business, because it's more traditional, for lack of a better term. But I don't think a lot of people are doing that in food service.
And what are your sort of limitations in growing that business?
It is really capital intensive, right? So the cheapest shop that we've opened to date has been about, maybe technically that would be the newest one, and it probably costs like $20,000 out of pocket.
And that's all up front, basically,
Exactly.
for the equipment,
Yeah.
lease, before you generate a single penny in revenue.
Exactly. I don't know if you know how expensive espresso machines are, but it's like you can buy like a pretty nice car or an espresso machine. They're nuts. Yeah. So yeah, it's the capital cost. So the cool thing is about coffee is that from a cash flow perspective, it's the exact opposite of professional services. It is super steady, super predictable, especially coffee, and especially when you establish yourselves as not jerks. You know what I mean? People want to go there, they show up on a regular basis. And that's one of the interesting things that I didn't realize about food service and coffee especially, is that essentially you have what are closer to like regular clients versus just customers. Like you have people who are there virtually every single day to chat with the same people and enjoy the same atmosphere, and thus your revenue is way more predictable. And especially now that we have this 5-year track record, and once we identify, okay, this is what we think we're going to be up from last year, month over month, it's super predictable. It's a little bit absurd, actually.
So what's the, so you have this cash flow challenge, right, in the coffee business, or espresso bar business, excuse me. And as you as you see that and you're hiring these employees, and you've talked a little bit about making sure that they engage with the customer, et cetera, but sort of if you unlayer that one more layer, what's sort of the culture like? And how do you maintain that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
How do you say, you were friendly for the first 6 months, but now you're frowning too much and you're not all that nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's time to go. How do you sort of manage that, right? And there's high turnover, I would imagine, in that business potentially.
I think with other places, they probably experience a lot of high
excellent.
turnover. We don't. We've got my management team have all been with me from basically the start, which is a big important piece to me. Like I at both businesses, I believe in, like promoting from within. But the culture is huge, and so luckily we've gotten to a point where it's very formal, where our core values are documented, what we believe in is documented, the experience we're trying to create is documented. And so it's easy to have that conversation with new hires and then to hold people accountable to that and say, here's a specific instance where a customer complained. And I'm big on starting with one of the worst reviews we have on Yelp, and one of the worst experiences we had was my fault. You know what I mean? Telling people, like, because there was times when I was working behind the counter and I wanted to get a picture of the whole business, and it was just a simple misunderstanding. But the person, they didn't have the experience that I want them to have. So it's like I don't wrap people on, oh, this specific instance you did terribly. It's more like, hey, let's learn from this and talk about how the experience we've defined and the culture that we have dictates that we should behave differently.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I heard an interview with another business leader once, and they said that every week they sit down and read all of their Yelp and social media reviews.
Yeah.
And then they turn that into a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, we do that too.
Not a blame game,
Exactly.
but how can we fix this?
Yeah, I still respond to all of the feedback that we receive through our point of sale system.
Okay, great. So I'm going to wrap this up in a few minutes here and give everyone an opportunity for some questions so you can think about those. But there's a couple other things I wanted to cover first. So if you were giving advice to someone or mentoring someone who's sort of contemplating changing something in their career, right? Or, I mean, you've clearly, you clearly are excited and enthusiastic about trying new things.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
That's part of your DNA.
Yeah.
Right? I want to do new stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so that's, I mean, you're gifted for that. And so if you were giving advice to someone who's thinking about making a career change, maybe from working in a large company to now starting something on their own, or from leaving what they're doing now because they have a dream, to do something, what advice would you give them?
Man, that's a tough question. Also, I think it's ironic that you think that my desire for adventure is gifted, because ironically that was exactly why I was failing school. Was that same desire? But
But that may be
I
a comment
digress.
about our education system and
Yeah.
not about you.
Yeah, could be, could be.
Says the
mean-
guy who works in the education industry.
I mean, I want to hop into that industry at some point in the future. I mean, honestly, I think for me, it's about defining what I want. You know what I mean? As long as I know exactly what I want, which frankly, for most of my life, I think has been true. But that's one of the things that I really need out of life is adventure and uncertainty, which you get from running a business. You get uncertainty. And so I've always pursued that. So I'd say, like, literally define, write down what you want, and especially what you want out of, like, the process of life. You know, there's this great Zen quote, which is, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. And the first time I saw that, like, my mind was blown. I was like, oh my God, I've been living my life wrong. I've been pursuing this thing that I think will make me happy, but I need to just create the process that makes me happy. And so if you actually just define, like, the type of life that you want and then just pursue that life, I don't think you can go wrong. And maybe that life does entail change or not. You know, maybe it's just tweaking the existing job that you have, you know. But I don't know. I think that's been pretty key for me.
So is there sort of an internal process you go through that says, gee, here's this coffee bar. I mean, you were sitting there, going there every day, right? And now all of a sudden it's going to go away. So is there an internal process that you go through that says, okay, this sounds like a good idea. And then a lot of people have that conversation with themselves. But you actually then take the next step,
Yeah.
right? So what's that process like of saying, okay, I'm now going to step off the curb and do this, right? Because a lot of people think about it. A lot of people talk about it. But you then take that and turn it into an actionable item, right?
Yeah.
You have a bias for action. So what's that process like?
You know, it's funny because, again, I think back to like the things that there's so many unknowns in this world, and the things that we attribute to positive traits, I think, can sometimes get muddy. So growing up, I was the stupid kid that people are like, why the hell would you do that? Like, you know, the number of times that my mom asked me, what were you thinking, is probably innumerable. So it's like, you know, I don't know, maybe in some ways, you know, it could even still prove to be a detrimental thing to leap too many times. I don't know, but it's what makes me happy, so.
Yeah. I had those conversations with my mom as well, oftentimes on the way home from the emergency room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So, happy to open it up to some questions from the audience. We have a few minutes. Any questions? Yes.
You talked a little bit about kind of the ebbs and flows of the revenue streams. How do you go about generating new business? Do you have a dedicated business development team? Is it kind of you? And what does that look like?
So this year we just brought on our first biz dev person, Tara, right behind you. And so yeah, other than that, it's primarily been through existing relationships, especially given what we do. It's a very, very sensitive thing. And so one of my biggest, go off on a quick tangent, one of my biggest, most favorite words within life right now is context. So I think the context of cybersecurity dictates that is the best way for us to pursue revenue, because you need a very, very trusting relationship to be like, oh, hack my organization. And so we leveraged that and focused on existing relationships and said, hey, we had good results with you. Do you know someone else we can talk with? Or we focus on partner organizations. So we've got a couple key partner organizations that do related things but don't do what we do. And so we have a very, very good working relationship with them. My goal for this year is for me to focus 90% of my time on business development and not focus on operational things. And we're getting close, but it's a struggle, that's for sure. Yeah, thanks.
There are a lot of coffee shops in the world, and a lot, maybe more than too many, seem to go the opposite direction. They seem to fail rather than expand and plan new locations. So what would you say, from your perspective, are some of the main reasons like coffee shops fail or coffee shops succeed?
I think the main reason why coffee shops fail is the main reason why most small businesses fail, which if you ever actually look at the mortality rate for small businesses, it's pretty scary. But it's because I think people treat it like they don't treat it like a scalable business from the start, which we have done. And so continuously investing in things that can allow us to scale and grow and you know, frankly, I haven't taken out a dime in revenue from or in profit from Stacks. It all goes back into it. But I think people kind of they don't put themselves in a position to do that. You know what I mean? They put themselves in the business. They put themselves as the key operational person. They make themselves the single point of failure for way too many things, and they put their own ego in the business way too much. Like, I hate when I can tell that this place is constructed for what the owner likes and not what the customers like. I despise that, and every single decision we make is counter to that. It's what will the customer like and not what do I want to see here. So, yeah.
What significant failure have you experienced that led to significant change?
I don't know how to answer that. I don't think I have a good example because I have a different perspective on failure.
Well, it's a lesson learned, but
We closed, so I acquired a shop in Windham, which is a very seasonal town, and had to close it 6 months later. I said, this juice is not worth the squeeze. But it was a great learning opportunity, which again is why we pulled the trigger on. I was like, okay, if the financing of this makes sense. And so that was another interesting one. I wanted to talk about that for people who are cash strapped. Is if you read 2 books, read Nothing Down for the 2000s. I don't know if there's a newer version of it now. It's about some guy who goes and buys real estate with like $100 in his pocket. And have you read that book?
Yeah.
It's great. And basically, I think he ends the day with like $95 because he spent $5 on lunch, something like that. So read that and read How to Negotiate Anything, something like that, or You Can Negotiate Anything. So Wyndham I acquired for basically $1,500, and it was like, roughly probably $25,000 or $30,000 worth of equipment, and then I just paid them, $15,000 over the course of a year and a half. So from a capital investment perspective, from a cash flow perspective, it was at least breaking even, and thus it wasn't a like catastrophic failure. But it was like clearly like, we got into it and we're like, it's just not going to be worth it to suffer through 4 to 6 months like this every year, hoping that those in-season months are great. So we closed it down and said, all right, we're not going to go to a town like that again, probably ever. So
So we have time for one more question.
What's your favorite trend to where you envision it going in 5 years since cybersecurity and computing changes so real time and quickly?
where do I think cybersecurity is going?
Push a trend, one that you're interested in, one.
All right, so this is a good opportunity to talk about one initiative that we actually just kicked off because October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So we are so convinced of so my second book was basically the fact that every single organization is so vulnerable today that a single hacker with a reasonable set of skills can acquire everything that organization cares about. And I'm so convinced of that we're willing to put our money where our mouth is this month, and we're doing free if we fail, which is basically you hire us to hack you, and you don't pay us unless we succeed. But because, again, we feel so confident that, frankly, the world is trending worse, that it's becoming easier to break into organizations. And so so maybe a couple of related trends is the need for what we're proposing, which is a regularly hacking organizations so that they can identify those weaknesses before actual hackers do. And I think there's a very, very interesting component of like machine learning and artificial intelligence to make the things that are very labor intensive right now easier on both sides. So again, that means that the defenders can utilize it to make their defensive tasks more efficient, but the hackers cannot use it as well. So very, very interesting trend. Yeah, good question.
So excellent. Tyler, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
just a really... Mike, I found that talk by Tyler really fascinating. And one of the things that really jumped out at me, which I certainly wouldn't have said before listening to him speak, was sort of the similarities between a super high-tech consulting business and running an espresso bar. The thing that jumped out at me is Tyler's relentless pursuit of being focused on his customers and making sure he delivers a product that his customers are happy with. And I think that's a great lesson for entrepreneurs and people who are building a business to remember that without customers, you have no business. And whether it's a super high-tech consulting business or you're running an espresso bar, you gotta leave people with a smile on their face, and they have to be happy. And it's another great testament to the power of the word of mouth. If you think about it, I think he said he doesn't do a lot of advertising, and his business grows kind of on a referral basis. So that's one thing that really jumped out at me. What was something that jumped out at you, Mike?
Well, building off what you said, Bela, this idea of having a laser focus on customers, it runs counter to a lot of what I hear are words of advice for entrepreneurs, which is know your market, know your customer, know your target, know your business inside and out, be an expert. But this guy, Tyler, was in multiple businesses, right? Cybersecurity, the coffee business, now co-working spaces. How do you kind of make all this fit together, Bela? It's a little bit of a mystery to me.
Yeah, I think it's, it goes back to the characteristics that are common amongst entrepreneurs. I think they're curious. They clearly have a curious mind. Tyler has this continuous focus on learning. If you listen to sort of between the lines, he didn't finish high school. And so, another one of the entrepreneurs that left high school. It's not uncommon. I'm not recommending that, but it is a path that people have been able to do. But he had some unique characteristics that enabled for him to still be successful, even though he sort of stepped back from a formal education. And that's this self-driven, continuous focus on learning. He also figured out that working in a larger company doesn't work well for him. Again, I think if you listen between the lines, he did learn some valuable lessons there, but he figured out that wasn't the environment that worked for him. And he clearly likes to drive the bus and not being a passenger on the bus. That's a particular trait he has. And I think that, along with his focus on customers, are some real common characteristics that he has that's made him successful across this very diverse set of businesses, right? We haven't talked about his shared working space. Here again, now he's a landlord. He's providing these services to, starting to upcoming companies. So he's in three very, very diverse types of businesses, but they do have these common characteristics.
I like it. Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. The other thing that I thought was interesting when we talked about hiring folks, up until a few years ago, there was no training for being a cybersecurity person. Now, a few colleges and universities have started formal education programs in that. And there's no place to go to learn how to be a barista, at least not around this region. So how do you hire people? And I think it comes down to what he said was this notion of passion, curiosity, and you're working in a constantly changing environment and making sure that the folks you bring in, whether it be in the super high-tech Leet cybersecurity company or in his cafes, have those characteristics. So those were the things that struck out at me, Mike.
Neat. I think there's a real thread here. Orientation toward learning is huge, even when it doesn't include formal education, is fantastic. And then passing that craving for learning on that Tyler showed into the culture of his organization, into the hiring process, into the emphasis he puts on training across all his businesses. And then he said a lot of interesting things about how that transfers over into the financial side of business and in terms of cash flow and capital needs. I think that was a really neat piece too, to connect. How do you create a really customer-focused, learning-centered environment where your employees are going to be engaged and motivated and not turn over? How do you plan around that in terms of your labor costs and cash flow, or in terms of your capital needs to start the business? Any takeaways that you saw there, Bela?
So one of the things that jumped out at me here again, if you look at both of those businesses, the folks that work at Leet Cybersecurity are in high demand, and those folks can walk and go someplace else and find another job. And it's similar in sort of, coffee shops. Those are not folks that there's fairly high turnover. So the question is, how do you keep good quality people? And Tyler said an interesting thing. He said, it's not about work-life balance. It's about life balance. And if you provide people with a life balance, i.e. a flexible work schedule, ability to work remotely if the business allows that, those are important things that keep good people there. And I remember in one of our earlier podcast episodes with Ed Mitzen, who runs Finger Paint, he also talked about that this notion of life balance is really important. And his business was basically a consulting business, much like Leet Cybersecurity. And the work there and the demands on your time ebb and flow. There are periods of time where, you got to come in on Saturday and Sunday, and you got to work really long hours because you got to meet this customer demand. But there's other times when maybe things are not so busy, and you use that time to enable people to balance their lives. So that was a thing that jumped out at me too.
Great. That was a really great interview. Thanks for going out of your way to get Tyler to talk, because I took a lot out of that, and I hope the listeners did too. We're really happy that everybody joined us in our podcasting adventure for this week, and we hope you found the last hour interesting and thought-provoking as well. We have two small requests. One is if you have questions about what we discussed or suggestions about topics or potential guests, get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com. And number two, if you like what we're doing, hit subscribe in your podcast app, or even be radical and consider writing a quick review. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that. If you know others that might find us interesting, please share us with them as well. It'd be great.
So that's it for this week. Thanks for spending time with us. We look forward to a great conversation in our next episode. So see you next week, Mike.
Sounds great, Bela. Have a great week yourself.